Okay, so let's go to the answers and see what has been sent. Okay, so Kaylin said Queen F2 and Ethan Queen E3. Let's see. All right. So Queen F2, Queen E3. The moves are okay. They're definitely okay. But the answer is knight to G3 check. So where is this coming from? Well, let's see. The white king has no pieces defending it on this side of the board. The white king only has 2 pawns. Most of the white pieces are on the queen side. The queen, the knight, the 2 rooks, and the bishop. They are on the queen side. So now, this must mean that if we can start an attack somehow against this king, we should be able to move. And we notice that our queen is very powerful on this A7 to G1 diagonal. So the king cannot move. The white king has no moves. And normally when you can see that your opponent's king cannot move, you must always be smelling something, that something might happen. If I can find a couple of checks, I might be able to checkmate. And hence the idea comes to mind, knight G3 check. Now the king has 1 square to move. Is there a way for us to bring another piece into the attack to help the queen? Is there a way for us to bring the king, another piece to help the queen to attack the black king, or the white king, sorry? Okay, so anyone, you can say, you can unmute if you have an answer. Oh, there's a message. Okay, so Ethan said the rook. Yeah, good job, Ethan. It is the rook. So we can play h6. h6 is the winning move, and there the puzzle has been solved. The problem is that if the white takes this pawn, all of a sudden, rook takes h6 is checkmate after the queen sacrifices itself. There, black wins by checkmate. There is literally no defense after knight g3, h6. White has no way to save their position. The king cannot run away. If it tries to move up, it still falls into the same problem. There's h takes g5 check, and the queen must get in the way to protect, and it is GG. All right, great job, guys. Now, this is something that I usually like to do when we do a group lesson for us to get to know each other a little bit better. Since we, okay, I know Ethan and I know Kaylin, but all 3 of us maybe don't know each other at the same time. So let me ask these questions so that everyone in the group will know each other. If Daniel joins, which I hope he will later on, he will also answer these questions. But so tell me, what is your name and surname? That's the first question. How long have you been playing chess? What is your favorite color? And what is your favorite chess piece? Okay. So since there's not that many of us, we can all unmute and speak when we want to, but you can raise a hand, then I'll pick you if you raise the hand, and then you can tell us your answers to those questions. But let me start so that I break the ice. Just wait, Ethan, I'll start. So what is my name and surname? So my name is Dione. My surname is Goredema. How long have I been playing chess? I've been playing chess for about 15 years now, plus minus. And what is my favorite color? Not really sure if I have a favorite color, but if maybe I had to choose, it's probably blue. But I don't really know if I have a favorite color, so to say. And what is my favorite chess piece? Again, I don't really have a favorite chess piece, but if someone had to ask me to choose one, I don't know. Maybe the bishop. Who knows? Who knows? Okay, Ethan, your hand is raised. Yes, go ahead, Ethan. You must unmute.
My name is Ethan, and my name is Ethan, and my surname is Mazikana. I've been
Mm-hmm.
playing chess for around 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite color is green,
Mm-hmm.
and my favorite piece is probably the the queen or the bishop because they can both take each other down in a
Okay.
certain way.
Okay. Very good. Okay, thanks, Ethan. Kaylin.
Okay, my name is Kaylin Kleinans. I've been playing chess for around 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite color is teal, and my
Your favorite
favorite
color is what?
teal.
Teal.
Yes, it's like an ocean blue color.
Ah, okay. Fancy.
And my favorite chess piece is a knight or queen.
All right. Great. Thanks. Okay, now that we all know each other a little bit better, let us get into the story of today. End games. So, tell me what you know about end games. Again, you can raise your hand and I can pick you and you can say, but just tell me what you know. You can tell me what you know about end games or what you don't know about end games. But either ways, I would like to hear your thoughts on this subject. So no one is raising their hand. Maybe I'll ask a specific question. What do you know about chess endgames? What should you be looking to do in chess endgames? Okay, Kaylin.
You'd be looking to take more pieces of your opponent and try to checkmate him.
Okay, take more pieces and try to checkmate. Okay, Ethan.
The king is very important, and it's important to also use the check, capture, and threats in the endgame.
All right, the king is very important in looking at calculation, checks, captures, and threats. Okay, that's interesting. Is there anything else? Can you tell me more? Both of you. Yes, Ethan, your hand is raised. Oh, you took it down. So, yeah. Is there anything else? Can you tell me more? Ethan?
In the endgame, your pawns, if you have more pawns, you have a very big advantage as you can trade them off the board and you'll be left with the amount of pawns left on your board, on the board.
Correct. That's good. Okay. Kaylin, can you tell me more about the end games?
There's not a lot of pieces on the board, and you have to try to promote your pawns if you have a lot of them.
Okay, try to promote pawns. Yeah. Okay, now we're getting closer, right? So generally that's how we get answers. We should just keep asking questions. So okay, you guys at the beginning, maybe it was a bit uh, surprising the question, but at least now I could get a bit more answers from you guys. Okay, so the end game. So we know that chess is one game, but it is divided into 3 different stages. The stages are, of course, the opening, that's the stage 1, and then there is the middle game, and then there is the end game. Those are the 3 stages: opening, middle game, end game. And chess is one game, but it is divided into 3 different stages. And each of the stage has a specific strategy that you need to follow. If you want to follow the strategy, you need to understand what exactly you should be looking to do. So the title of our lesson is How to Think in Chess Endings. That's what we are going to be focusing on. So what do you think is different about the end game? What is different about the end game from the opening and the middle game? Or do you think there is anything different about the end game from the other stages? Scalen, you can go first, then Ethan next.
There's not a lot of pieces in the end game, and more in the opening and the middle game. There's a little bit more pieces.
Ethan?
In the opening, first you're starting to develop your game and taking out your pieces so that you can form an attack. In the middle game, it's when you're still trying to form an attack and you're thinking of maneuvers. And in the end game is when you're trying to finish off the game and you never know how many pieces are in the end game because there is because it's unpredictable because of the amount of pieces on the board. The game can go anyway, anyhow.
Sorry. Okay, so you guys definitely have some ideas. I'm glad to see that. Well done. And really, this is the key thing I should highlight. Whenever you learn, you want to make sure that you are engaging in the lesson, right? Answering questions is one way to do it. But also, as a chess coach, I can only train you properly when I know what you know and what you don't know. So at least this has given us a good starting place for us to get into our lesson for today. So first, I must just say that I'm going to read a few things here that are important, and I hope you pay attention. The first thing that is important about the end game is that, according to a strong chess player, Lev Paskis, this is what he said: to learn and play end games well, the chess player must love end games. What do you think this strange statement means? Ethan, your hand is raised.
It means that you should like the end game because it means you're looking towards to learning from it and also knowing more things about it. So researching and all.
Yeah. Kaylin?
It means when you have to love the end games, you want to learn more and you want to go search it, and yeah.
No, okay, great. Both answers are very right. I like that. Thank you. So now let us get into the topic itself. I have been teasing it for a long time, but now we will get into the lesson. So, okay, I still want to read. There'll be nothing here on the board for some time. I'm going to read a few things to us, then I'll start putting some notes up. Okay, so there are different kinds of end games. That's one thing you should know from the beginning. And each of them have a specific thing, specific ways you must play them. They are pawn end games, they are knight end games, they are rook endgames, there are bishop endgames, there are queen endgames, there are bishop and knight endgames, there are rook and minor piece endgames, and there's rook versus queen endgames. There's many endgames. So there is a lot of them. So every serious player must know the many typical just means common, the many common positions and main principles of all endgames, because you must at least have an idea about how to play in all the different endgames. So that knowledge should help you, but it is not enough to be a good player. Just knowing the general ideas is not enough. There are just too many different endings. This is why maybe some players don't actually take serious time to learn endgames. A lot of chess players like the openings. They like some mid-game tactics, sacrifice, checkmates, something like what we saw at the beginning of the lesson. So people want to see that because that's fun. There's checkmate, there's a sacrifice. The king is checkmated. So that is fun, that's exciting. We can see it. But with endgames, sometimes there's a lot of them, so the players can get overwhelmed. But one thing that many players don't actually know is that in endgames, there are a lot of tactics actually. When you study endgames, you realize there may be even more tactics in endgames than there are in openings and some middle game positions, because the less pieces that are there, the more power you see that a piece has. Like, for example, many beginners hate the king because they think the king is a useless piece, it's very slow, and it does nothing. Also, many beginner chess players hate the pawns because they are very small and they are not worth that much, because the coach tells them the pawn is only worth 1 point. So the beginner in their mind dismisses the pawns. Hence, they are not afraid to give away pawns for free when they are attacked, because in their mind, the pawn means nothing. It has no value. And the king is a very slow man, right? Very slow old man. So the king is not exciting also. But with all the other knights, the queen and all of that, the bishops, the knights, the rooks, and all the stuff, that gets everyone excited. But actually, when you go down to this kind of situation, which happens more than any other situation, right? The king and pawn endgames. These happen more than any endgame in the world. As I told you just now, a brief list of all the endgames that there are, this one happens more than any one of them, because every single chess game can end up going into a basic king and pawn ending. So endgames help you to realize or help you to know the power of the piece. Like, for example, in the opening and the middle game, it is a very good idea to try to keep your king tucked away behind 3 pawns or 2 pawns near the corner somewhere. Because if it comes near the center, it runs a risk of being run over by the opponent and being checkmated. It's like the president of a country standing in the middle of a war. It's probably not a great idea, because the chances that the president might be killed is very high. So the same thing with a king in the middle of the board. If the king stands in the middle of the board, it's like the king standing in the middle of war, where there's guns, shooting, and all of that. It won't be good for the king, yeah. So it's same thing with our king. But in the end game is another story. In the end game, the king now there's no pieces left anymore. This is a typical end game position. This could happen at any point. Now, how is the game going to be won? What will happen if we are now left with these meaningless pawns and this very useless and slow king? How am I even going to win this game? So I will put the question to the group. How do I even win this game? How do I win this game? Ethan.
You should push the pawns you should push the A and B pawns first. So you should start by B5 and then the A pawn can pick where it wants to go, but know where it goes if the king cannot catch it because it's not in the box. So then after, if it trades, if they trade, then it can push because the king cannot catch up to it.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that idea or those ideas, Ethan. Kaylin, you wanted to say something?
I wanted to say the same.
Okay, that's fine. All right. So, okay. So then here we can see really that the king is not a very slow piece after all, especially when it is time to move. Here, the basic endgame idea, okay, you guys at least saw that you need to push this pawn, but what happens when the guy comes here? How do you win? So let's do this. I'll play with black, the two of you will play with white, and you guys need to try to make me resign. I'll be defending the black side. All right, so let's see, E comes before, no, C comes before E. So Kaylin, you can go first for white, then Ethan, then we change again. Ethan, Kaylin, Kaylin, Ethan, Ethan, Kaylin. You get the idea until I have to resign. Or I might even swindle you guys and win the game. Who knows? Who knows? So what do you guys think about that? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. So
Yes.
Kaylin, so you guys will be a team. The two of you versus me. So Kaylin, start for your guys' team. What will you play here? Why to play? I just played King C7.
I would have played King D5.
King D5. Okay. And I play G6, Ethan.
King C5.
King C5. I play B7. Ethan again.
B6.
B6, H5. Now Kaylin.
G3.
G3. Uh, I play G5. Ethan, it's your turn. Oh no, Kaylin, actually, it's the other way. Yeah. So both of you have played. So Kaylin, you must now go twice in a row. And then Ethan. Kaylin. Kaylin, you are muted. It's your turn.
F4.
F4. Mm, Pawn takes. Ethan.
G takes F4.
G takes F4. H4. Ethan again.
H3.
H3. F5. Kaylin. Kaylin, it's your turn.
King D6.
King D6. King B6. Your turn, Kaylin.
King E6.
King E6. King C7. Ethan.
King F5.
King
King takes
F5.
F5.
King D7.
King G4.
King G4. king to e6, Kaylin.
King take h4.
King h4, king to f5, Kaylin again.
King g3.
King g3, and then king f6, Ethan.
Could I have about 30 seconds to think of it?
Sure.
King g4.
King g4, king g6, Ethan again.
King f5.
No, you cannot play king f5. It's
I mean,
an illegal move. Illegal
pawn
move one.
f5.
So you guys have one more illegal move. If you make another illegal move, then I win. Yes. So be careful. You are trading on thin ice. Pawn f5. King f6. Kaylin.
Pawn to h4.
Pawn h4. King f7. Kaylin again.
King g5.
King g5. King g7. Ethan.
Pawn f6.
Pawn f6. King f7.
H5.
h5. King f8. Did you play twice, Ethan, or you only played once?
I've played twice.
Okay, so Kaylin.
King g6.
King g6. King to g8. Kaylin, your turn.
f7.
f7. King f8.
h6.
h6. Okay. King e7, Ethan.
King g7.
King g7. King e6.
F8 queen.
All right, great job. Okay, so then I resign. So you guys win, all right? Well done. So, okay, you played quite okay. You didn't make many mistakes. Of course, I was hoping for you guys to go wrong at some point, but you didn't make too many mistakes. But there was a quicker way to win the game. After this, you just go here. You don't need to waste time. So this is a basic idea that is known in endgames. If you have an extra pawn, what is the name of this pawn in chess?
An isolate, sorry.
Yes, Ethan. Yeah.
An isolated pawn.
It is isolated, but not so. That is true. But what other name do we call a pawn like this? There's a specific name that I'm looking for. Kaylin?
A passed pawn.
Correct, a pass pawn. A pass pawn has no pawns in front of it. Ethan, you want to say the same thing?
I was gonna say a pawn on one island.
Oh, okay, yeah. But this is the name also is passed pawn. So a passed pawn is a pawn that doesn't have an opponent's pawn standing in front of it or on the files next to it. This means that the pawn has a free runway to go to the promotion square. It won't be blocked by a pawn standing in front of it. It won't be attacked by a pawn standing on the right or on the left. So it is free. That's also another name for a pass pawn. Another name for a pass pawn is a free pawn because it's free to run down the board to promote. So now you can, so the technique, or the technique just means the skill that you need to use to win. You just create a pass pawn here. And this is even a worse kind of pass pawn for black. This is called an outside pass pawn. An outside pass pawn is a pawn that is near the edge of the board. So the further away it is, though, it drags away the enemy's king to that side, which allows you to go after these weak pawns that won't now have anyone to defend them. So after this, king e5 is just winning right away, because this king cannot follow back, because if it does, this pawn now, it passed, so it will just queen. So this forces this king, after king e5, to go after this one, and now you just go after all these three pawns. So even though you guys ended up winning, but in the end, you had to sort of struggle a little bit, although not too much, but this would have been the quickest way to win. And now one of the pawns fall. Black is hopelessly lost. The king is far away from the pawns. White will have three pass pawns, and it's easily winning. So anyways, that was just an example of how the king and the pawns are very powerful, even though we don't see it right away when we learn the rules. So the end games help with that. The end games help you to really understand the power of the pieces, and also to learn tactics. As I said, end games are very tactics. No, are very tactical. Sorry. So let me read a little bit more, and then we'll start looking at examples soon. Okay. So listen. So the first thing is that, first of all, we separate end games into two categories, into two groups. In other words, end games are separated into two groups. There is tactical and strategical. Those are the two groups of end games. They are tactical end games and they are strategical end games. Tactical endgames must be treated as middle games. So tactical endgames can be played with the same plans that we follow in middle games. As in the middle game, our thoughts are busy with calculation based on the specific plan that we want to follow. But often in our games, as practice proves, strategical endgames are difficult even for computers to find the best moves, right? These are not endgames that rely on calculation. You don't just calculate to find the moves, but you need to find the right plan. So it is known from the time of Capablanca that in strategical endgames, we have to think by plans, we have to think by schemes. Schemes is just another way to say plan. It's just a more clever way to say it. And variations and calculations will only happen later on. So in strategical endgames, what are you supposed to do? You want to know where to put your pieces. Find the idea of improving the position of your pieces and start making a plan. This is what is called endgame thinking. That's really what we'll be focusing on. We are focusing on endgame thinking. We won't really focus on the one part of the endgames, which is called the theoretical endgames, where you need to know how to win king and pawn endings, knight endgames, bishop, all of that. That will take forever. It takes a long time. So this wasn't the focus for this lesson. This lesson is focusing on how to think in endgames, how to come up with plans, how to come up with ideas, and how to, basically, you at least know the method to follow in endgames to help you to find a way, even if you don't know what you are supposed to do. So now let us start looking at this with some notes on the board. Okay, so lesson goes, number one, how to think in endgames. So you guys already told me some things you know about the endgames. You said use CCT. Number two, capture all your opponent's pieces and try to checkmate. Number three, try to push your pawn to help it to promote. Number 4. There was one other thing that I forget. What was the other thing? I think it's what you said, Ethan. You said use CCT and you said another thing. What was the other thing?
To use your king in the end game.
Correct. Well done. Use your king in the end game. Excellent. All right. So, okay. This one, I would scratch it out. Maybe for finding calculation, but you are not really looking to calculate so much in endgames, because especially if it's a strategical endgame. And also this one, I would scratch it out. This is not really part of endgame thinking. Capture all your pieces and try to checkmate. These things are more about the middle game. These things happen mainly in the middle game. Endgame proper is these two things. Try to push your pawn to help it to promote. Use your king in the endgame. So you guys at least have a right idea for the first one. For those of the last two. So 4-step method. This is like the formula that I'm going to show you. And I created it myself, but the things I learned it from many other people. But the fact that it's 4-step method, in fact, I made it up. So I just created a formula for players to use if they are in the end game. And I call it the 4-step method. It can even be improved now. 4-step thinking method in the end game. Number 1, try to create a passed pawn. This is the number 1 and the most important plan in chess endgames. Try to create a passed pawn. If it's a proper chess endgame, if it's not like a tactical endgame where they are like a queen and 2 rooks still on the board, because that can already be a middle game position also sometimes. So you can still follow these kinds of things. But if it's a mid endgame position, which usually has less than 9 pieces, and there is not a direct way to force checkmate. So this is some of the 2 ways to really see if it's an endgame proper. There is no way you can really figure out how your opponent can checkmate your king directly, like right away, they just checkmate you. So that can be a good idea that it might be an endgame proper, where the king is safe to come out and go into the center. Number 2, when there is less pieces on the board, about 9 pieces or 9 to 10 pieces less left on the board for both sides, you know. So when that is the situation, the 4-step method in the end game, the formula 1 + 1 = 2. So the formula in the mid end game, try to create a passed pawn. This works in every end game, whether it's a strategical end game or it's a tactical end game. The person with the passed pawn already has some advantage, because the passed pawn, as we could see in this example, there were no passed pawns right now, and black would still maybe hope that if white plays carelessly, if white doesn't know anything, black can just know that if they can get their king closer in time, and white plays some strange moves because they don't know the plan of create a pass pawn, suddenly black is safe in this game, right? And maybe even winning. But of course, when white understands the whole plan of creating the pass pawn, that was the number 1 plan, first of all. In the end, it is the first of all, but the king has to be active first. So king must be active. So we must actually, the number 1 plan is to create a pass pawn, but we don't always have to start with it. The second plan is also important. Piece activity. When you have pieces in the end game, like your knights, your bishops, your rook, and the king, queen, etc., you must have more piece activity. Now, what do I mean by piece activity? What do you think piece activity means? What do you think piece activity means? Ethan?
Making sure your pieces are active.
Okay, but what does it mean that your pieces are active? What does it mean?
You're moving them and they're not just laying around at the back rank,
Right,
and
okay,
you're
that's
making them also help with them.
correct. Good job. So your pieces are able to move. So one of the main ways to know if your piece is active, it is able to move. When a piece is blocked and it's closed, like if the king is in the corner here, it's not very active. It can't even move. It can only move to one square, right? So piece activities is speaking about the movement of your pieces. They are able to move to a lot of squares. That's one. And also your pieces can attack the opponent's pieces, and they can also defend their own pieces. That is what is called piece activity. So you must first make sure that all of your pieces are in the right squares. And then number 3, bring your king into the center for 2 reasons. What are the 2 reasons you bring your king in the center to the center in the endgame? What are the 2, Kaylin?
It can move to a lot of squares, so it can easily be. It's really active.
It's active, indeed. Good. Ethan?
The king is very important in the endgame and should always be protecting its pawns because it is worth more in the endgame than it is in any other
Correct.
2 parts of the game.
Okay, cool. So that is the key thing there, what you said. Both of them are right. Activity is right, Kaylin, but we want to use the activity for something. So that's something Ethan mentioned it. Protecting its pawns. Protecting its pawns. But maybe not even that exactly. That can be a job. But the 2 main reasons are these. Attacking the weak pawns of the opponent and helping your passed pawn to promote. These are the 2 main jobs the king comes to the center for: to attack the weak pawns of the opponent and helping your passed pawn to promote. Right? So we saw with this example. Oh wait, did I destroy the moves? Yeah, okay. So this king came to the center to help the pawn to promote. So this king had to back away. If this king was not here, that passed pawn could just be taken for free. But the king protects, so that's why I was saying Ethan's idea was almost there. It does protect the pawn, but more than just protect the pawn, it's helping it to promote. So this means the black king has to back off. And now the king does its second job, which is to, so this was the main line with you guys playing on and pushing the pawn. But the quicker way was to just go here. Now we attack the opponent's weak pawns. So if the guy goes here, the weak pawns are the pawns that cannot be defended by the other pawns. And now these pieces are just sitting ducks. They are just waiting to be taken. So that's the job of the king. And number 4, so we try to create a pass pawn. Piece activity. Bring your king into the center for 2 reasons: attacking the weak pawns of the opponent and helping your pass pawn to promote. And number 4, put your opponent into Zugzwang. Who knows what this word Zugzwang means? Ethan?
Zugzwang means when the other opponent is in a certain position where they don't want to move, but they have to move.
Okay. Thank you, Ethan. Kaylin?
It is when you played a forcing move and the next move that your opponent makes, it's gonna be a bad move.
Right. So when you bring both of your answers together, Zugzwang, so Zugzwang is the German way to say it. Zugzwang is the English way to say it. So Zugzwang means that your opponent is in a forced losing position. Forced losing position. Both of your answers are correct. We just bring them back together. Forced losing position, meaning any move your opponent makes loses the game. Forced losing position, meaning any move your opponent makes loses the game. So actually, I'm noticing this will probably need to go up to 5-step thinking method, because I have learned this Zugzwang as a new one recently, updating my previous 4-step. So 5-step thinking method in the end game. The last one and the most important, do not rush. Many end games are lost or are drawn because someone rushed and they didn't think. They just rushed and made a big mistake. Like, you'll be surprised how many people throw away this end game. They would do things like this, push the pawn, you know, and then they just start to rush. Why? Okay, whose turn is it to move? It's black. So say black plays here, and they just start to rush and playing rather carelessly, allowing the opponent some chances. And now all of a sudden, whether they'll win or not is another question, but they don't really take into account of the counterplay of the opponent and try to stop it. So this is the problem of rushing in the end game. So these are the 5 steps then for you that you can now use in your armor in the end game. You can put this as an armor in any end game position you play, even if you don't even know the theory of how to play that end game, like what the books have already taught us. If you follow these 5 steps, you at least find your way. You can use these 5 things as a way it's like a torch. If it's in the dark, you don't know where you are going. If you turn on the torch, you can definitely at least have some idea. So these ones will give you some idea, but it's not enough just to have the words. Let me show you pictures as well. So the pictures are games by strong grandmasters or strong masters of the past that played amazing end games, and especially this man. Akiba Rubinstein was one of the greatest endgame chess players of all time. He played chess more than almost 100 years ago now. So he was an expert at endgames. He was a genius is really what he was. Very creative. So the opening is not our topic. We are only focusing on the endgame. So we'll play rather quickly. So now we have already started to arrive closer to an endgame, although the king cannot be too careless yet, because if the king would just rush out now and try to stand on e4, this would be foolish. Now, I'm not telling you when I say follow these things, you just follow them blindly. In any case, let me tell you this. Never follow anything blindly in chess or in life. Test everything for yourself. If you don't test it for yourself, you are putting yourself in big danger, right? Because I cannot always tell you everything that is right. Sometimes I might say something that is not right. So why not test it for yourself? Ethan?
Yes, am I there?
You are here, yes.
Okay. think I
Did
was
you?
live for a bit.
Oh, was it you or it was me? Could you not hear what I was saying?
It was me.
Oh, okay. All right. So in everything you learn, test it for yourself. Okay. So here, as I said earlier on, the king does come to the center, but not now. Why would it not be very wise to bring the king to the center now? Kaylin?
Because there's still a minor piece, and the rooks can come and attack the king if it comes out too soon.
Correct. So this not for now, not yet. So what we see is still following some middle game plans. Rooks belong on open files. But if this is not an open file, this is called what file? Who knows what this file is called? It's not an open file. Ethan?
I'm not sure on the name. It might be a closed file because both of the pieces, they are blocking it from an entrance.
So that's why I wanted to mention it, so that you guys can know the other part. This is called a half open file. So when an open file in chess is this. This is an open file. There's many of them actually. In this position, there is 3 open files on the board. So when we learn how to read the chessboard, we know that the letters, these are the lines, the files, C file, D file, E file. So a file, when it's open in chess, it means there are no pawns standing on the white side of the board and the black side of the board. So there are 2 kingdoms on the chessboard, the white kingdom and the black kingdom. So the 2 armies both have territories. So each one has pieces on each side. So an open file normally means there are no pawns on both sides of the board, not on the white side or on the black side. The reason why the pawn closes or opens a file is that a pawn is a very slow piece. So it will take long for this pawn to move out of the way. It may never move out of the way. It can probably stay here for the rest of the game. So when there are no pawns on that file, it means the pieces are able to use it to enter into the enemy's territory, right? But this is a half open file because there is only 1 pawn on both sides. Black doesn't have a pawn there, but white has a pawn. So usually rooks want to be on open files or on half open files. Why do you think rooks want to be on open files or half open files? Why is that? Ethan?
So that they take advantage of the game, meaning that when they're on open files, they have more, they're blocking threats, pieces, and check and illegal moves as checks that are coming. So they're blocking off the king and other pieces.
I mean, it's an attempt. You tried, but that's not correct. So the reason why the rooks come on open files or half open files is to enter into the enemy's territory. That's the simple reason. You put your rook on the open or half open file to enter into the enemy's territory, especially the 7th rank. The rook wants to be on the 7th rank. It's 7 when you count from your side to the other one. That's how it was always taught. But here we could say 2nd rank for white, but it just means the 7th rank anyways. So rook belong on the 7th rank. Why? Because it will attack the weak pawns that are there and it will endanger the enemy's king. The enemy's king can be checkmated when the rooks come in. Also, the rooks can come into the opponent's territory to attack the weak pawns or attack pieces, and they control important squares. So that is why. So why am I teaching this? Because piece activity is the reason when you are in an endgame or close to an endgame, your pieces must be very active. So you see white does the same thing, puts the rook on an active square, half open file. There is no pawn blocking him on his side, but he can attack the black pawn now. So the pawn has to move because it was in danger. Now, all the sides are busy activating their pieces. Knights in the center are usually very good. And now, knight b4 with a simple threat to win a pawn. The pawn on c2 is hanging. So c3 played. Knight to c6 to exchange this very active knight. So the knights are exchanged. Now we are really close to an endgame. We have an endgame of 2 rooks. Right. So the rook, this is called a rook lift. Now, there is a half open file, but this pawn is blocking the white rook. So you can lift your rook up a rank to move it to other sides where it will be able to do a more active job. So now this is the part of the endgame where piece activity comes in. The rook is not active when it's looking into its own pawn. It's very passive right now. So you can rook lift it across the rank. When you move your rook up a file and move it across the rank, it's called rook lift. So here, white makes a rook lift, black also makes a rook lift. Rook h3, the rook lift works. Now the rook is active, it attacks the weak pawns of the opponent. So h5 played. Rook to f3, putting pressure on the opponent's pawns. So as we can see, some of our 5-step methods are being followed, but mainly pieces are active. The rooks are very active at the moment. We'll start to see some of these plans come to life soon. Try to create a pass pawn. Bring your king to the center and put your opponent in Zugzwang, forced losing position, and do not rush. At the moment, this also is being done. No one is just rushing with a plan. When their plan is stopped, they are not just rushing, they are trying to see how the opponent can stop it. So now e5, threatening to win a pawn. Pawn takes, rook takes. Rook to e3, exchanging a pair of rooks. And now we have an endgame of just one rook. I told you that the most common endgames that happen is king and pawn endings, but the second most common endgame that happens in chess is king and rook endings. These are the second most common endgames. Why? Because the rooks normally start in the corner of the board. So it takes very long for them to really move. So by the time they are able to move, it's usually almost the end game. So rook endgames, you can expect them a lot in your games, and pawn endings as well. Now, the piece activity, hitting the pawn, rook. Now, this is the problem. Black's rook is very passive now. A passive piece is only doing a defensive job. Its main job is just to defend. So already white is starting to get in bad position. Now rook again on this half open file. Now let's see if you are remembering any of these things. Why should the rook go on in a half open file or an open file? Why is that? Ethan?
So that it's on the evaluation point. I'm not sure if I'm not correct now.
No, I think that's not correct. Kaylin?
To attack your enemy's territory.
Correct. Attack the enemy's territory. You want to enter, right? Enter into the enemy's territory with your rook. That's really the main reason why. Okay, so that was the threat. Black wanted to go to the 7th rank because the rook on the 7th rank is a pig. A pig is known for eating too much. So the rook on the 7th is a pig because it eats everything of the opponent that's there. That's why white stops that from happening. Now we are starting to see this plan, bring your king to the center for 2 reasons: attack the weak pawns of the opponent and helping the opponent, your pawns to promote. The king comes to the center for the main job, to attack the weak pawns. A weak pawn is a pawn that cannot be defended by another pawn. The pawn here can never be defended by another pawn anymore. So the rooks and the king have to watch over it. So our king attacks that one. Now b4 played. Now we are seeing the other plan. So which of the 5-step method plan is being followed now with this move? Which of them is being followed? Ethan?
He's trying to create a post pawn.
Exactly, you see, he's trying to create a pass pawn. So king to c3, g4. And now white also is trying to follow that same plan themselves. They want to create a pass pawn because they know that that is really the #1 plan in every endgame. If you can create a pass pawn, you can create some problems for your opponent. But now white tries to stop black from creating a pass pawn by playing rook to g2. Now he's not really sacrificing a pawn because if black king takes, then this pawn is falling. So what would you play now in response to rook g2? How would you deal with this move? Ethan?
King f3.
King f3. Okay, that's good, but this one is also good as well. Rook g6. So this will help me to teach you another lesson. Rook belong behind passed pawns. You want your rook to stand behind the passed pawn so that the pawn can be supported by the rook from behind to queen. So this rook goes there to prepare for that. And now g3 is played. Takes, and king f3. King. Now the opponent is just winning, and he resigned after this. a6 is a very strong move. It forces the king to move back. The king either has to go to c4, b4, or a4, and white will be losing afterwards because king f2 will be played. The rook will move somewhere on this rank, say here, but after g2, now we see why rook belong behind passed pawns. The rook is supporting the pawn. So if white would play maybe c6 themselves, there is even a tactic here. Try to see if you can spot it. What is the tactic? I did tell you that endgames are very tactical, Ethan.
Rook takes c6.
Correct. Rook takes c6, rook c6, and then queen. And this game is just losing. Right. Okay, so black resigned, didn't want to see any of that. Let's look at one more game as an example before we finish. So let's basically skip the opening because we don't really not doing the opening. But just to see the floor, or at least I'll just show maybe how the moves started. But we're not really learning the opening. So you can see that Rubinstein had confidence in his endgame skills. He usually liked to go into the endgame very quickly. This is one of the most famous games that has ever been played. It has become what is called in chess a classic, right? That's why you should record your games. If you play very good games, maybe 50, 20, 50, 100 years from now, people can be looking at Ethan Mazikana's games or Kalen Kleinhans's games. Right? So try to play chess in that sense. Think of how I want to play games that can be looked at by people 100 years from now. If you try to think like that, chess becomes more fun because you stop focusing only on winning and losing. You are more focusing on creating something that will last for a long time. Because this game was played in how long? Let's see if they have the details. Look there. The game was played in 1909. This is more than 100 years ago. And today we are still looking at this game. This is one of the most famous games in chess. It has been used to teach endgames by many chess coaches because it's such a great material to learn from. So we see here the people are rushing into an endgame. Already we have seen an endgame sort of set up. There is now less pieces, although the kings are not yet safe to just rush into the center because they could be checkmated. But we are getting closer to the endgame. Bishop takes, pawn takes. Now we have an endgame proper. We have a rook and a knight versus a rook and bishop endgame, and the pawns, of course, are on the board. So what should you be following to do here? Let's now try to use this 5-step method ourselves, and let's see if we can guess the moves that the master was playing. This will be our last game, and then we'll finish the lesson. We might go over time a little bit, so please forgive me, but hopefully not too much. But we'll finish with this one. So what would you play here following the 5-step method to see if you can guess what the master was doing? And if the 5-step method works anyways, like I said, test out these things. Don't just believe it because I tell you. I might be lying, who knows? So you want to test it to see if it really works. So what would you play here? Okay. I'm looking for answers. No one is saying anything. Ethan?
Knight to F knight to F5, going towards the king um by the H file.
So knight f5 going towards the king by the h file. What do you mean? What is your plan with this move?
I want to try and take opposition and take more parts of the board, and also try and get him so that he's in a bad position.
Oh, you want him to get into Tsuk's one. Oh, okay. All right. So b6. Kaylin, why b6?
To try and create a fast pawn.
Okay. At least it is trying to do it. So this is I'll teach you a cool trick. If you want to create a pass pawn, always see how many pawns are there. If it's 2 versus 2, it's very unlikely that I can create a pass pawn. But if I have, for example, this setup, 2 versus 1. 2 versus 1 it just means I have 2 pawns versus 1 pawn. This means I will definitely create a pass pawn this side. And if I even improve the position a little bit, again, 3 versus 2, 3 pawns versus 2 pawns, I know on this wing, I'll be the one to create a pass pawn. Whereas black cannot hope to create a pass pawn. Because 3 versus 3, unless there is a mistake. And let's see if you guys know your endgame stuff, and maybe also to convince you that afterwards you want to go, you are hungry to study endgames. And hopefully, maybe if I did my job right, I hope that after this lesson, you at least have grown, maybe not in love with endgames, but at least the interest is there. You want to go and research this fascinating part of the game a bit more. How it is white to play here? How can white win the game right away? How can white win the game right away? Anyone has an idea? Just say what you think, because we're also running out of time. We don't have too much time to think. So just say what you think. How can white win here? Or do you think white can win? Maybe let me ask that question. Kaylin, do you think white can win here? Okay, Ethan, you raise your hand. But Kaylin, I was asking a question. I'll come to you, Ethan. Just wait. Kaylin, can white win here?
Yes, white can win. I have been in this position, but it's been like 2 years ago. So I'm
Okay.
trying to figure out what was the move.
Okay, no, that's fine. Ethan,
They can win, but it's also gonna be very difficult. So probably like 85% chance they're going to draw.
so you guys have not seen this position, or at least the idea. Maybe you have seen the position, but not the idea. White is winning right away after b6. The game is lost. Black can start to cry. It's just resigns. This is an example of when 3 versus 3 can win. Only when it's like this. But usually when they are far away from each other, you don't normally create a pass pawn. So I told you that endgames are tactical. This is the tactics you must always be keeping up to date with. b6 is winning right away. Why is b6 winning? b6 is a big threat. White threatens to take these 2 pawns and just queen on the next move. So black is absolutely 100% forced to take on b6. If black takes on b6, what does white do? Another sacrifice, threatening to take and make a queen on the next move. So again, black is forced 100% to take, and what is played now? Very simple. The pawn pawn has been created. White queens in 2 moves. White is completely winning. The same thing happens if black plays c takes b6. What do you play? Let's see now if you have picked up the idea. Ethan?
You play a6.
A6, correct. And now you threaten the same thing to take and queen. So pawn takes is forced, and now the pawn just queens. The king cannot fly to c8. So the game is completely lost. So you see there, end games are very tactical and fun. So this one is called a pawn break. All right, it's called a pawn break. When the 3 pawns are 3 versus 3, but the issue is that these 3 are in the black's territory. So they can make a pawn break and sacrifice 2 pawns just to create a pass pawn, because it's so close to the queening square that the opponent has no way to defend. So what do you guys think about this position? Let me just hear your thoughts after seeing this. Kaylin?
If you understand the position, it's not that complicated. But when I first saw it, it looked really complicated. But now that I understand it, it's not that complicated.
Very important point. Well done for stating that. Knowledge is power in the end game. When you know something, it gives you a lot of intelligence in end games. Oh, yes, Ethan, go ahead.
It helps because now you know more about the end game, and you can see all the threats that are. You can now figure out how all the threats that are there, a thinking process for it, and also know how to get an advantage in the end game.
Exactly. Good job. All right, so let's go back here. So now, right now, let's see. I'll try to do it with you guys. So try to create a pass pawn. So right now we have 2 versus 2. We cannot really create a pass pawn easily this side because they are still in each side. So the pawn break dream won't happen right away. On this side, maybe is where we have a real chance to create a pass pawn, because the opponent has double pawns. These are bad pawns. When you have 2 pawns on the same file, they are bad. But of course, they can't be attacked right now, so they are not really a very big weakness. But they can be bad in an endgame, especially because when you have 2 pawns on the same file, white has less chances to create a pass pawn. But black has more chances to create a pass pawn this side, because we technically have 2 versus 1 here happening this side. So we can have some future hope to create a pass pawn there. But firstly, piece activity. The plan from the 5-step method to follow is your pieces must be active. Very, very important. Before you come up with the plan in the end game, make sure your pieces are in the best positions possible. So the rook on the open file to enter into the opponent's territory. So the king stops that plan, shuts it down. And end games teach you to guess the opponent's plan. Only beginners are ignorant of the opponent's plans and threat. Do we all know what the word ignorant means?
Yeah.
Okay. Ignorant, you don't pay attention. You don't care, basically. That's the best way to say it. You don't care about the opponent's plans or threats, but only beginners don't care about the opponent's plans and threats. So as you can see, white stops that plan. Now knight to c4 check, activating the knight. The opponent exchange. Now, surprise, surprise, we see again a king and a rook endgame, but now we now know why. And now we see a king and pawn endgame. This is the most common endgame that happens in chess. And we know from the one we saw, the very simple one we saw at the beginning, this one is a little bit more difficult than the one I was showing you, because this one is very easy. Okay, even this one is now easy because you know the pawn break idea. But the one I was showing you earlier on, where you had to create a pass pawn, you already had an extra pawn. You were a pawn ahead, so it was easy. But here, no one has a pawn ahead. It's equal material. So do you think that anyone can win this position? Is it possible to win this position? Ethan?
Yes, because white has a doubled pawn, so it will be a bit easier for black to try and get a to win the game.
Okay. Kaylin, what are your thoughts? Do you think it's easy to win this position?
It isn't going to be very easy, but you can do it if you think very strategically. And because there's a double pawn, so it's going to be easy to create a passed pawn.
Okay, right. And also the double pawn creates weaknesses. These pawns are not defended by other pawns. In fact, they cannot be defended by other pawns. So a weak pawn in chess is a pawn that cannot be defended by another pawn of the same color. So that is a plan. You must always have a plan when you play in chess, especially the endgame. So now the king is going to need to be active to attack the opponent's weak pawns and help the pawns to promote. And we are going to see this fourth point. Put your opponent into zugzwang, into a forced losing position. Normally in king and pawn endgame, zugzwang is a very big theme. You can use it a lot to win. Mazekana?
After, can you please have can I please have a recording of the lesson?
I will share the recording when I upload it. I'll share it with you and everyone else. But yeah, okay. So king f6. The king gets active in the endgame to attack the opponent's weak pawns. That's why Rubinstein, the great endgame player of the past, heads towards these pawns to capture them. That's exactly what he does. Now he has reached that weak pawn. The h2 pawn cannot be defended by any pawn. So the king has to defend. And now we will see the second point. Put your, or the fourth point, sorry. Put your opponent into zugzwang. So already we have seen in the other game, creating a pass pawn, piece activity we have seen in both games. Even here we saw the kings. Now, by the way, when I say bring the king to the center, doesn't mean you must literally put the king in the center. It just at least gives you an idea. Please understand that. It doesn't mean you have to move the king first. Like here, Rubinstein will be like, well, the notes say first go into the center, after the center, then go there, right? Please, guys, don't, chess is not that literal sometimes. You literal means you take it exactly as what it says. That's what it means. But it means it gives you an idea. King in the center just means the king needs to come out from the corner. It needs to go to an active part of the board. But the main points here is to focus on that. The king needs to be active in the endgame to attack the weak pawns of the opponent and to help your pawns to promote. Hence, the king did not need to go to the center in this game. It just went to attack that weak h2 pawn. So that's that. I thought I should make that clear. So the one point we really have not seen is this one. Put your opponent into zugzwang, and the last one, do not rush. We'll really see all of them in this game. So the opponent has now reached here. So we see that, okay, fine. White is holding on. He's defending. White only has one weakness, and the weakness has been defended. So in chess, it is not enough to win the game if you only have one weakness. If your opponent have one weakness, they can defend it very well. But if the opponent has two weaknesses, then they really cannot defend. I'll give a real life example. Like if you are in a tug of war, if you are on the team that has 8 people and the other team has 7 people. The other team with 7 people, if they all 7 people work really well together, there is a very high chance that they might even win, or at least not lose, make a tie at least. But if they are down with 2 people, that's too many. 2, 3 more people becomes already almost impossible to defend. So 2 people would be very, very difficult to play tug of war with. So in chess, 2 weaknesses or 3, 5, 6 weaknesses are overwhelming. They cannot be defended. So here he doesn't rush. he starts to create a second weakness. And how does he do that? He makes sure that if this pawn moves, he's going to take it. And now black will have double pawns again, but these ones will be the worst double pawns. The ones that are isolated, meaning they cannot be defended by any pawns next to them. So white doesn't rush, white just sits still. Ethan? Oh, you unmuted. I thought you wanted to say something. Okay, it's fine. Let's continue. B5, making sure that this pawn cannot move. In chess, weaknesses must be fixed. This is a weak pawn. It's backwards. It's behind the pawn next to it. So a backwards pawn is a pawn that is behind the pawns next to it. So you must fix weaknesses. Fix them means you must stop them from moving. So B5 doesn't allow the A4 pawn to move, because if it moves, it will be taken and white will be losing. And now this is exactly what he's doing. The king is not moving away. It stays there. No rushing. Make sure you are fixing the weaknesses. And finally, the goal is to win this position using put your opponent into zugzwang, forced losing position. Any move your opponent makes will be losing the game. King G1, F4, F5, King H1, F4, King 2, G1, H5, King 2, H1, G4, and E4. Ethan?
Don't you mean pawns instead of king?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Pawn takes, and H4. King G1, G3, pawn takes, and the opponent resigned. The opponent now is going to be in a losing position. Why? They are in zugzwang. No, wait, how did he take? He took this one. Now they are in zugzwang. Why? Because any move white makes is losing. If white takes, black wins now by taking what is called the opposition. The opposition is when the kings are standing with an odd number of squares between them. It can be 1 block, it can be 3 blocks apart, and it can be 5 blocks apart if the king was standing here. So now this means this king is now stopping the opponent's king from moving forward or coming up. So this king is useless now in defending its weak pawns. Now the king goes back to its job of attacking the weak pawns and helping the pass pawns to promote. So this position is just lost. After takes, we have created a pass pawn. So plan 1 has been achieved again. Try to create a pass pawn. And now the opponent will try to stop us. Let's see if you guys now know how to win this quickly. How would you play now after king e2? Quickly, we have gone over time, so don't think too long. Kaylin?
D4.
Correct, king d4. Ethan, you wanted to say the same thing?
Yes.
Yeah, king d4, king d2, king c4. He has to go here, take everything, and it's just lost. The pawn will run down the board. The king will shoulder the other king, not allow it to come close because the kings cannot touch. So that is our lesson, ladies and gentlemen. What do we think then from what we have learned today? Let's make a review before I let you guys go. What have you learned in this? Okay, Kaylin, your hand is raised.
I understand endgames a little better. The 5-step is helped me understand endgames a little better, and I think I'm gonna do better in endgames.
Okay, excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Ethan?
I've been struggling on the end game, so after the tips, I'll try them out and I'll see if I'll get a better end game, and I'll stick to them and also stick to the way of thinking in the end game.
Wonderful stuff, guys. That's very good to hear. And I'm glad that at least now you have some information that can help you to try to play this exciting part of the game, the end game. But again, like I said, test it out for yourself, see if it works. If there is any questions, you can always ask questions. So the last point there you saw on our lesson is practice and skill. Unless if you practice these things, you will never do them well. I'll tell you right away. I'll be the bearer of bad news. If you don't practice them, they won't become a skill. A skill only comes after you practice, right? If you want to ride a bike, you need to learn how to ride the bike, but you need to actually ride the bike to be able to ride the bike. So the same thing with what we have done here. So of course, the practice and skill, you can always rewatch the video if you want that, but also I'll send the notes. The notes I was writing with the 5 steps, I'll send them to your parents and they'll give you these notes. Start following these 5 notes when you play end games, or maybe start by doing it in practice, because you can't do it in a real game because it will be cheating. So use the notes when you are playing practice games, say with your friend or with your parents, and use the notes and make them part of your thinking. But in real games, you start to use them as you remember them and try to see whether they work or not. Only by doing this can this become a skill, and then you should start to see, after a lot of hard work and commitment, more better end games from your side. But at least now you have a torch with these 5 steps that even if you walk in the dark room of the end game, you should be able to see some way out. That is the lesson. I'll allow Ethan. Yes,
I've
Ethan, go
seen
ahead.
that in the tournaments there have not been much players there, because sometimes I remember entering the Friday and Sunday tournaments. I played and then I only got to play one game, because after I played that one game, all the 3 other people who were in there went on to a pause. And I saw one of
No,
the
no.
people who were on the pause, they were playing another game.
Yes, sorry about that. No, I'm not laughing because they paused, but the fact that someone paused and they were now busy playing another game. I'm going to encourage the players to play more in the practice games, because we do need people to play. But they were starting to play a little bit more now recently, 4 or 5 people, but at least now that many people are on holiday, hopefully more people will start to play in the practice games. So sorry about the inconvenience when people don't play, but there is a bit more people now. So I also encourage people and parents to encourage the students to play, so that there is more regular practice games, because you need to practice. Okay, so that's it, guys. Thank you so much. I won't keep you any longer. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, and as always, keep chasing. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Galen. Bye, Ethan.